The silence was deafening, broken only by the gentle hum of the airplane engine. I stared at the picture on my phone, a selfie my mother had posted just hours ago. Her face beamed, radiating a happiness I hadn't seen in years, and next to her, my brother, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. First class. Champagne flutes sparkled in the background. The caption read, "Living the dream, family vacation time." The crimson tide of betrayal washed over me, choking me with the bitter truth. They were living their dream, a dream from which I had been deliberately excluded. They thought I wouldn't find out. They thought I was nothing more than a burden. If you've ever felt betrayed by your own mother, father, brother, or sister, subscribe now to hear stories of those who took back control. Growing up, I was always the responsible one, the reliable one, the one everyone could count on. My name is Riley, and from a young age, I understood the unspoken rules of our family dynamic. My brother, Ethan, was the golden child, effortlessly charming and perpetually in need of rescuing from one self-inflicted crisis or another. My mother, bless her heart, saw him as her precious angel, incapable of wrongdoing. And me? I was the dependable workhorse, the one who picked up the pieces, both emotionally and financially. I excelled in school, landed a stable job straight out of college, and quietly funneled a significant portion of my earnings back home. It wasn't a formal agreement, but an unspoken expectation. "We're a family, Riley," my mother would say, her voice laced with a subtle guilt trip. "We have to support each other." And I did. I believed her. I truly did. Until the vacation lie unraveled, exposing the raw, ugly truth. The request had seemed innocent enough at first, a family vacation, a chance to reconnect, to create lasting memories. I was excited, even though money was tight. I had been diligently saving for a down payment on a small condo, a place of my own, a sanctuary from the constant demands of my family. But family came first, right? So I eagerly inquired about the destination, the dates, the budget. That's when my mother's face clouded over, her voice dropping to a somber tone. "Riley, sweetie, we'd love to take you, we really would," she began, her words carefully chosen. "But things are just so tight right now. You know how Ethan's been struggling, and with the cost of everything these days." She trailed off, letting the unspoken conclusion hang in the air. I was simply too expensive. The vacation was off. I swallowed my disappointment, masking it with a forced smile. "Don't worry about it, Mom," I said. "Maybe next year." I even offered to help Ethan with his expenses, pulling even more from my savings so the family could at least function. I spent the next few weeks working overtime, sacrificing my evenings and weekends to make ends meet, both for myself and for them. I barely saw my friends, my hobbies gathering dust in the corner of my tiny apartment. I told myself it was temporary, that it was an investment in my family's well-being. Then, the pictures started appearing on social media. Not just any pictures, but glamorous, sun-drenched snapshots of my mother and brother living it up in the Bahamas. 5-star resorts, gourmet meals, private beaches. The contrast between their opulent reality and my own scrimped existence was stark, a slap in the face disguised as a vacation photo album. The line about being broke echoed in my ears, each word a tiny shard of glass piercing my heart. I had been played. I had been used. And the worst part? They didn't even have the decency to lie convincingly. The person I trusted most was one of them. The air in my tiny apartment seemed to thicken, each breath a reminder of my naivete. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. Instead, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every interaction with my mother and brother, searching for the hidden clues I had missed. Had they always seen me as nothing more than a financial safety net? Was their affection conditional, dependent on my willingness to sacrifice my own dreams for their comfort? The questions swirled in my mind, a relentless storm of doubt and resentment. I tried to push them away, to rationalize their actions, but the glossy vacation photos kept flashing before my eyes, a constant, painful reminder of their betrayal. My appetite vanished, replaced by a gnawing anxiety that settled deep in my stomach. I forced myself to eat, knowing I needed to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but each bite felt like chewing on ash. My work suffered. I found myself making careless mistakes, losing focus during important meetings, and snapping at my colleagues. My boss, a kind, understanding woman, pulled me aside one afternoon, her brow furrowed with concern. "Riley, is everything all right?" she asked gently. "You haven't been yourself lately." I wanted to confide in her, to pour out my hurt and anger, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. The shame was too overwhelming. The thought of admitting that my own family had deceived me too humiliating. "I'm fine," I mumbled, forcing a weak smile. "Just a little stressed." She didn't press further, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. I was unraveling, slowly but surely, and I didn't know how to stop it. Driven by a desperate need for answers, I decided to confront my mother. I couldn't continue living with the uncertainty, the constant suspicion gnawing at my insides. I called her, my voice trembling slightly as I asked if we could talk. She agreed readily, her tone light and breezy, as if nothing were amiss. We met at a small cafe near her house, a place we used to frequent when I was a child. As I sat across from her, the familiar scent of coffee and pastries filled the air, a bittersweet reminder of happier times. But the warmth and comfort I once associated with this place were now replaced by a cold, hard knot of resentment. "Mom, I saw the pictures," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "The pictures from your vacation." Her smile faltered, her eyes darting nervously around the cafe. "Riley, sweetie, I was going to tell you," she stammered, her voice laced with a false sincerity. "We just didn't want you to worry. You know how stressed you've been lately." "Stressed?" I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "I'm stressed because I'm working myself to the bone to support this family while you and Ethan are gallivanting around the Bahamas." Her face flushed, her eyes hardening with anger. "Don't you dare speak to me like that," she snapped. "We needed this vacation. Ethan's been going through a tough time, and I deserve a break too." "And what about me?" I countered, my voice trembling with rage. "Don't I deserve a break? Don't I deserve a little happiness?" She stared at me blankly, as if she couldn't comprehend what I was saying. "Riley, you're young. You have your whole life ahead of you," she said dismissively. "We're just trying to enjoy ourselves while we still can." Her words hit me like a physical blow, confirming my worst fears. I was nothing more than a means to an end, a source of income to be exploited and discarded. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I'm done," I said, my voice cold and hard. "I'm done sacrificing myself for this family. You're on your own now." I turned and walked away, leaving her sitting there, speechless and stunned. As I stepped out of the cafe, a wave of nausea washed over me. I had finally spoken my truth, but the victory felt hollow, empty. I had cut ties with my family, but in doing so, I had also severed a part of myself. The following weeks were a blur of financial anxiety and emotional turmoil. I moved out of the family home, finding a small, affordable apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. The silence was deafening, the solitude crushing. I missed the familiar chaos of my family, even the constant demands and expectations. But I knew I couldn't go back. I had to rebuild my life, brick by painful brick, and learn to rely on myself and only myself. I cut off all financial support to my mother and brother, bracing myself for their inevitable backlash. It came swiftly and mercilessly. My mother bombarded me with guilt-ridden phone calls and tearful voicemails, accusing me of abandoning my family in their time of need. Ethan sent me angry texts, calling me selfish and ungrateful. I ignored them all, steeling myself against their emotional manipulation. I knew that if I gave in, even for a moment, I would be sucked back into their vortex of need and obligation. I threw myself into my work, using the long hours as a shield against my pain and loneliness. I started exercising regularly, finding solace in the physical exertion and the endorphin rush. I reconnected with old friends, people I had neglected during my years of family servitude. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to heal. But the anger still simmered beneath the surface, a constant reminder of the injustice I had suffered. They had taken my kindness for granted, exploited my generosity, and then discarded me without a second thought. They thought they could get away with it. They thought I was weak. But they were wrong. So wrong. The wheels of revenge began to turn. I knew I had to find something, anything, before it was too late. Then a lifeline appeared. A former colleague, someone I had helped countless times in the past, offered me a temporary position at his new company. It wasn't glamorous, the pay was minimal, but it was enough to keep me afloat, at least for now. Relief washed over me, a temporary reprieve from the relentless storm. I threw myself into the work, determined to prove my worth. I arrived early, stayed late, and volunteered for every task, no matter how menial. I was grateful for the opportunity, and I wouldn't let it slip away. As I navigated the treacherous waters of my new reality, the anger towards my family continued to fester. It was a constant companion, fueling my determination, but also consuming my thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, the sting of their deception. I started to analyze their behavior, dissecting their motives, searching for the cracks in their carefully constructed facade. I realized that their greatest weakness was their arrogance, their unwavering belief in their own superiority. They thought they were untouchable, immune to the consequences of their actions. They underestimated me. They saw me as weak, easily manipulated, and incapable of fighting back. But they were wrong. I was stronger than they could ever imagine, and I was about to prove it to them. The desire for revenge began to take root, slowly but surely, transforming from a burning rage into a cold, calculated plan. I would not lash out in anger. I would not stoop to their level. I would use their own arrogance against them, exposing their lies and deceit for the world to see. I started to gather information, meticulously documenting every instance of their selfishness and manipulation. I revisited old emails, text messages, and financial records, piecing together a comprehensive picture of their duplicity. The more I uncovered, the more determined I became. They had made a grave mistake when they betrayed me. They had awakened a sleeping giant. The silence now was different. It was the silence of focused intent. I deleted the vacation photos from my phone. I didn't need them. I knew exactly what I was going to do. It wouldn't be quick, and it wouldn't be pretty. But by the time I was done, they would understand the true meaning of betrayal. The spark of resolve had become a raging fire. I smiled. It was time to play their game, but with my own rules. The plan began subtly, a whisper in the back of my mind. I knew I couldn't confront them directly. They would deny everything, twist the narrative, and paint me as the villain. No, I needed irrefutable proof, evidence that would expose their lies beyond any doubt. My brother, Ethan, was the key. He was arrogant and reckless, prone to boasting about his exploits, especially online. He thought he was clever, but he was sloppy. I started monitoring his social media accounts, meticulously documenting every post, every comment, every picture. I even created a fake profile, posing as a wealthy admirer to gain access to his private messages. It didn't take long for him to start bragging about the vacation, the lavish gifts my mother had bought him, the designer clothes he couldn't afford on his own. He even sent pictures of receipts, carelessly revealing the source of their newfound wealth. My savings account, emptied without my knowledge. The evidence was mounting, but I needed more. I needed something that would directly implicate my mother, something that would shatter her carefully constructed image of a loving, selfless parent. I remembered a conversation we had months ago, before the vacation, when she had asked me to sign some papers related to my savings account. She had claimed they were routine documents, necessary for tax purposes. I had trusted her implicitly, signing them without reading the fine print. Now I suspected those papers were anything but routine. I decided to visit the bank, posing as a concerned relative, to inquire about the documents my mother had asked me to sign. I knew it was a long shot, but I had to try. The teller was initially hesitant, citing privacy regulations, but I persisted, feigning distress and concern for my mother's well-being. Eventually, she relented, pulling up the records on her computer. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the screen. There it was, a withdrawal authorization form, granting my mother full access to my savings account. My signature was on the form, but something was off. The date was different, the font slightly altered. It was a forgery. I had been completely betrayed. I thanked the teller, feigning relief, and hurried out of the bank, my mind racing. I now had concrete evidence of my mother's deceit, but I needed to authenticate it to prove that the signature was indeed a fake. I contacted a forensic document examiner, a specialist in signature analysis, and explained my situation. He agreed to examine the document, comparing it to my known signature on other official records. A week later, he called me with his findings. The signature on the withdrawal authorization form was a clear forgery, he confirmed. It had been traced or copied, not genuinely signed by me. He provided me with a detailed report, outlining his methodology and conclusions, which would be admissible in court if necessary. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. I now had irrefutable proof of my family's deceit and manipulation. It was time to move on to the next phase of the plan: exposure. I knew I couldn't simply post the evidence online. They would deny it, claim it was fabricated, and try to discredit me. I needed a platform, a way to reach a wide audience, and ensure that my story couldn't be ignored. I decided to contact a local news reporter, someone I had met briefly at a community event a few years ago. I remembered her being tenacious and fair, someone who wouldn't shy away from a controversial story. I sent her an email outlining my situation and offering to provide her with exclusive access to my evidence. She responded quickly, expressing interest and asking for a meeting. We met at a discreet location, a small coffee shop on the outskirts of town. I presented her with the documents, the photos, the forensic report, and the transcripts of Ethan's online conversations. She listened intently, her eyes widening with each revelation. She asked probing questions, challenging my assumptions and scrutinizing my evidence. I answered her honestly and transparently, knowing that my credibility was on the line. After several hours of questioning, she seemed convinced. She told me she would need to verify my story, to contact my family and give them an opportunity to respond. I braced myself for their inevitable denials and accusations. I knew they would try to paint me as a disgruntled, vengeful daughter, but I was prepared. I had the truth on my side, and I was confident that it would prevail. The reporter contacted my mother and brother, informing them of the allegations and requesting an interview. They vehemently denied everything, claiming that I was delusional and seeking attention. They even threatened to sue the reporter for defamation if she published my story. But the reporter was undeterred. She had seen the evidence, she had heard my story, and she believed me. She decided to proceed with the story, presenting both sides of the conflict and allowing the public to draw their own conclusions. I knew that exposing my family would come at a cost. I would face scrutiny, judgment, and possibly even legal action, but I was prepared to pay the price. They had taken everything from me: my savings, my trust, and my sense of security. They had left me with nothing but debt and despair. I was determined to make them pay for what they had done. The reporter informed me that the story would be published online and aired on the evening news. I waited anxiously, my heart pounding in my chest. As the clock ticked closer to the broadcast, I felt a mixture of fear and excitement. I knew that my life was about to change forever. When the story finally broke, it was explosive. The headline screamed, "Local woman claims family stole her life savings, used funds for lavish vacation." The article detailed my story, presenting the evidence and the accusations against my mother and brother. It also included their denials and their threats of legal action. The story quickly went viral, spreading across social media and attracting national attention. The public was outraged, condemning my family's actions and expressing sympathy for my plight. My mother and brother were subjected to a barrage of online abuse and harassment. Their reputations were ruined, their social lives destroyed. They had become pariahs, shunned by their friends and neighbors. The exact day they tried to end me, I exposed the truth. They scrambled, of course. The phone calls started immediately.
my mother's voice a strained mix of panic and fury. Ethan's texts were even less composed, a string of expletives and threats that I simply screenshotted and saved. They demanded I take the story down, retract my accusations, apologize for the damage I had caused. I ignored them, letting their pleas fall on deaf ears. The only communication I engaged in was with my lawyer, ensuring that I was protected from any potential legal retaliation. The news story continued to gain traction, sparking heated debates online and attracting the attention of investigative journalists. My family's carefully constructed facade was crumbling before their eyes, revealing the ugly truth beneath. Their friends began to distance themselves, their business associates severed ties, and their social circles evaporated. They were left isolated and exposed, the consequences of their actions finally catching up to them. But this was only the beginning. The real blow was yet to come. I had saved the most damaging piece of evidence for last, a secret that would shatter their lives beyond repair. It was something I had discovered accidentally while sifting through old family documents, a truth that had been hidden for years. My father wasn't my mother's first husband. There was someone before. The first husband. My mother had always presented herself as the grieving widow, a devoted wife who had tragically lost her husband at a young age. It was a carefully crafted narrative that had garnered her sympathy and admiration for decades. But the truth was far more complicated. I found a marriage certificate tucked away in a dusty box, revealing that she had been married to someone else before my father. His name was David. And then, a death certificate. David hadn't died of a tragic accident, as my mother had always claimed. He had passed in an institution, a place for people the world had forgotten. The cause? Listed as complications from advanced mental illness. My blood ran cold. I dug deeper, searching for any mention of David in old family photos or letters. There was nothing. It was as if he had been erased from existence. But I did find something else, a series of old medical bills, listing payments made to the institution where David had spent his final years. The payments were made from a secret bank account, one that my mother had never disclosed. The pieces were starting to fit together. She hadn't just abandoned him, she had silenced him, ensuring that he would never reveal her secret. And the worst part? The institution was known for its questionable practices. I contacted a former employee of the institution, someone who had worked there during the time David was a patient. It took some convincing, but eventually she agreed to speak with me on the condition of anonymity. She told me about the horrific conditions inside the institution, the abuse, the neglect, and the experimental treatments that were often used on patients without their consent. She also told me about a patient named David, someone who had been difficult, who had caused problems. He had been given special medication, she said, to calm him down, medication that ultimately ended him. My stomach churned. I now had a clear picture of what had happened. My mother had silenced her first husband, ensuring that he would never reveal her secret. And she had used my father's money, the money he had worked so hard to earn, to pay for it all. This was the ultimate betrayal, a crime that could destroy her completely. And I was about to expose it to the world. I contacted the news reporter again, informing her of my discovery. She was shocked but intrigued. She agreed to investigate, contacting the authorities and presenting them with the evidence I had gathered. The authorities opened an investigation, exhuming David's remains and conducting a forensic examination. The results were conclusive. David had been given a lethal dose of medication that had not been prescribed by his doctor. It was murder. The news broke like a tidal wave, engulfing my family in a storm of scandal and outrage. My mother was arrested and charged with murder. Ethan was implicated as an accessory, accused of helping her cover up the crime. Their world crumbled around them, their lives shattered beyond repair. They had lost everything: their freedom, their reputation, their wealth, and their family. As the trial began, I watched from afar, a sense of cold satisfaction washing over me. They had thought they could get away with their deceit and manipulation. They had underestimated me. They had awakened a sleeping giant. And now they were paying the price. The trial was a media circus, attracting attention from around the world. The prosecution presented a compelling case, detailing my mother's motive, her opportunity, and her actions. The defense tried to argue that David's death was an accident, a result of his mental illness, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for days, but ultimately they reached a verdict: guilty. My mother was sentenced to life in prison. Ethan received a lesser sentence for his role in the cover-up. Justice had been served. But for me, the revenge was complete. As I walked away from the courthouse, I felt a sense of closure, a weight lifted from my shoulders. I had finally avenged the wrongs that had been done to me. I had exposed the truth and brought my family to justice. And in doing so, I had reclaimed my life. The stage was set. The trap was ready. All that was left was to watch them fall. The cameras flashed, a blinding storm, as my mother and brother were led away, their faces masks of disbelief and fury. It was a stark contrast to the carefully curated images they had always presented to the world, the picture-perfect family enjoying their lavish lifestyle. Now the facade was shattered, the ugliness beneath exposed for all to see. The house, once a symbol of their wealth and status, now stood empty, a monument to their greed and deception. The designer clothes, the expensive cars, the lavish vacations, all gone, seized by the authorities as restitution for their crimes. Their friends and acquaintances, once eager to bask in their reflected glory, now shunned them, whispering behind their backs, eager to distance themselves from the scandal. Even my extended family, those who had once praised my mother's generosity and envied Ethan's success, now offered only strained condolences, their eyes filled with suspicion and judgment. They were alone, isolated by their actions, the consequences of their betrayal finally crashing down upon them. I watched it all unfold from a distance, a sense of detached satisfaction washing over me. I didn't revel in their suffering, but I couldn't deny the sense of justice that had been served. They had taken everything from me, and now they had lost everything in return. The world watched. Their carefully crafted lives evaporated, their freedom gone, their reputation tainted forever, their wealth confiscated. The phone calls I ignored were desperate pleas, threats that sounded weak, hollow. The trial was a spectacle. Every detail, every lie, every act of manipulation was laid bare for the world to see. My mother, once a picture of elegance and composure, now appeared frail and haggard, her eyes darting nervously around the courtroom. Ethan, always arrogant and entitled, now seemed lost and bewildered, his bravado replaced by a look of fear and desperation. They tried to deflect blame, to twist the narrative, to paint themselves as victims of my supposed vindictiveness. But the evidence was overwhelming, the truth undeniable. The forensic report confirming the forged signature on the withdrawal authorization form, the transcripts of Ethan's boastful online conversations, the testimony of the former employee of the institution where David had spent his final days. It all painted a clear picture of their deceit and their cruelty. The crimson of David's story was a dark stain on their lives. As the jury announced its verdict, a hush fell over the courtroom. Guilty. The word echoed in my ears, a resounding confirmation of the justice I had sought. My mother's face crumpled, her eyes filled with tears of rage and despair. Ethan's jaw dropped, his body trembling with shock and disbelief. They were led away, their sentences hanging over them like a dark cloud. Life in prison for her, something far less for him. A slow burn. Justice. I walked away from the courthouse, the weight of the past finally lifted from my shoulders. The anger and resentment that had consumed me for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of peace and closure. I had avenged the wrongs that had been done to me, not out of malice, but out of necessity. They had left me with no other choice. They had forced me to become someone I never wanted to be. As I started to rebuild my life, I realized that the revenge had not brought me happiness, but it had brought me something far more valuable: freedom. Freedom from their control, freedom from their lies, freedom to live my life on my own terms. The money was gone, yes. I'd never see that again. But the freedom? That was priceless. My savings were gone, wiped out by their greed, but they lost something far more valuable: their freedom, their family, their very souls. they lost everything. I just smiled. It was a small, quiet smile, but it spoke volumes. It was the smile of someone who had survived, who had overcome adversity, who had emerged from the darkness stronger and more resilient than ever before. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. It's a bitter pill that must be swallowed when all other options have been exhausted. It's not about seeking pleasure in another's pain, but about reclaiming what was stolen and restoring balance to a world that has been turned upside down. It's about sending a message that actions have consequences, that deceit and manipulation will not go unpunished. It's about standing up for oneself, even when it's the hardest thing to do. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.